Chris John for KaijuPop.com, and welcome to this video month in gaming history as we look back to August 1994. August, typically a cold, dead month for video games despite the heat outside, but well, it certainly is in 2014. But August 1994, pretty busy month as we'll find out with lots going on, and kicking us off this month is Treasure's Dynamite Headdy on the Mega Drive. Treasure had been around, as regular viewers may know, for about a year at this point. This is a year since 1993's Gunstar Heroes, and they'd already had like this kind of reputation for making really great sort of platform games and platform action games, character action games, with a hearty dose of humor, and this was very much a Treasure game, kind of focused around this guy Headdy that's in an auto-running section here. And I think one thing that Treasure were noted for, Treasure being ex-Konami developers, they were known just for their mastery of Sega systems over the years, and they were certainly able to squeeze an awful lot out of the Mega Drive just in this opening sequence. An awful lot of layers of parallax going on, a little bit of sort of pseudo sprite scaling happening here, and really just bright and colourful and awesome looking. The trick with Dynamite Headdy, or the gimmick with Dynamite Headdy, is that it was all taking place in a puppet show, and so all these layers look kind of hand built, in the background and hammered in, and there's an awful lot of allusion to the fact that this is a show. You can see the gears in the background there at the top of the screen and the stage falling apart. So that there is this really cool style to everything, and this sort of wink and a nod and breaking the fourth wall that happens in this game. Jump over. There we go. Oh no. And it's certainly this very, as Treasure would be known for, a kind of zany sense of humor and just a really lovable style that earned its fans, over the forthcoming years, whether they were making platform character action games or whether they were making shooters. They were also really well known for. I'm getting hammered here. This is right at the beginning of the game as well. Dear. Yeah, go away. I know. How on earth, dear, do I die at the start of Dynamite Headdy? Jeez Louise, I'm just not used to it. And every time I play games and talk about them, especially older ones, I embarrass myself with my ineptitude. And just there's a great sense of character to Dynamite Headdy. The fact that this sort of stuff that would ordinarily be done in cutscene, even back in the day, just like a simple animatic of your friends getting captured here, is happening in gameplay as you have this auto running section, which is really cool. The gimmick with Dynamite Headdy is that he has different heads that I would show you. I played this a fair bit just before I started, and I didn't die at the beginning. I did get into the game proper, as opposed to the tutorial section. Oh, how embarrassing, how utterly embarrassing. Jeez. But the idea was that he had different heads that he can switch between, and each of the different heads gives him different abilities in the style of kind of a Kirby style game, I guess. But also, I would say, in the style of, to sort of modern players, the Puppeteer. If you played the Puppeteer last year on PS3, this was there's an awful lot of Dynamite Headdy in Puppeteer, and that's quite a clear influence, and they were very vocal at the time of how heavily influenced by Dynamite Headdy and by Treasure the Puppeteer developers were. Again, absolutely slaughtered here, so I'm going to cut out and move on to the next game before I die again. I don't know what's wrong with me today. But anyway, let's move on to something with a little less character, I would say, that came out in August 1994. Something still brand new, but with rather less imagination than Way of the Warrior, a new game for your 3DO in August of 1994. This came from Naughty Dog, who, believe it or not, by this point had been around for 10 years, despite not really being particularly well known amongst gamers, perhaps because their only two releases up to this point had been PC RPGs. Certainly not known in the console space, as this was their console debut, I believe, and certainly way before they found fame on PlayStation formats. Way of the Warrior, despite a rather natty introduction and being having music supplied by White Zombie, was a sort of farcically horrific Mortal Kombat clone fighting game. These were popping up all over the place on the 3DO, on Jaguar, on everywhere where Mortal Kombat didn't deem fit to appear. Games like this sprung up, and Way of the Warrior did. There's not much to say about it really, other than it being a bit of a joke and having horrific controls. There are people that enjoy it for whatever reason, and I believe they enjoy it unironically. But it's really hard to say. Way of the Warrior, certainly not a great game, and pretty soon 3DO owners would have Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which was the fighting game of choice on that system, so no real reason to pick up Way of the Warrior. The only real thing of note was that it was Naughty Dog's console debut, and pretty soon they would probably find some things in common over miserable drinks in the pub with a certain Mark Cerny, who was also struggling with 3DO development, working with Crystal Dynamics on things like Uber Race at the time, and was famed for his ill opinion of the system he was working on. And so Mark Cerny and Naughty Dog found common ground, and Mark Cerny would hop aboard along with Universal to help produce Crash Bandicoot for the PlayStation, but that was a year down the road. Speaking of down the road, it's a racing game next. Need for Speed made its debut on 3DO in August of 1994, so here was another new franchise for this month. But this, unlike Dynamite Headdy and certainly unlike Way of the Warrior, this became rather more, sequel friendly, and absolutely became a massive franchise further on, and perhaps as it would go on, and recently with Criterion developed examples, would completely veer into the insane car racing and arcade sort of nature. When it first came out, the first couple of installments here were very sort of sim heavy and very car porn heavy. This was almost a sort of interactive CD-ROM with pictures of the cars, the supercars that you were driving, and little video clips of them, as well as really weird video clips of the people you were racing against. And it was almost as if the actual playing of the game was secondary to the car porn nature of it. And that's not really a surprise when you consider that Need for Speed was actually developed by a lot of ex-Accolade staff who had worked on the Test Drive games, like Test Drive and Test Drive 2 The Duel, and things of that nature, where it was about head-to-head races in exotic sports cars, and kind of giving a lot of data about the cars, and perhaps not focusing too much on the game itself. Need for Speed actually felt like a very, very much a continuation of the DOS and Amiga test drive games. It was all about choosing your car from a small selection and then going on a small selection of courses, about 3 or 4 courses in Need for Speed on the 3DO, with very sort of lovingly, I hesitate to use the word rendered because they were 2D, but very detailed sort of cockpit layouts, all in focusing on the first person view, putting you in the driver's seat and pitting you against just one opponent and the police. Every so often you would go by radar guns and then police would give chase, and you sort of had to evade the police, avoid sort of pedestrian cars, and race your opponent to the finish. It looked great for the time. This was sort of a real example of EA getting behind the 3DO. This and Road Rash really sort of showed off the 3D abilities of the system, and although it would be blown away later on, I think even by the Need for Speed itself on PC and PlayStation, where the frame rate certainly was a lot smoother, this still looked really cool, and it looked really cool to me at the time, sort of sneaking in and having a look at demo units and playing a little bit in shops, because Lord knows I couldn't afford a 3DO at the time. And even though gameplay-wise it wasn't really the most exciting racing game in the world, it certainly looked awesome, and that was kind of enough for the age, really. Of course, Need for Speed would I mean, it would get a little bit of sequelitis, and they would force out a couple more of these with reasonable fanfare, but I think it's safe to say that it wasn't until Need for Speed, the first Need for Speed Hot Pursuit in the early PlayStation 2 era, that people sort of sat up and took notice of Need for Speed, and then from there it went into a lot of games that were kind of fondly remembered, and a lot of games that were just rehashed year after year to annualize this, and but a lot of the games will become divisive in the future, and certainly strayed away from what this Need for Speed actually was. But a pretty decent example and a great game to get for your 3DO, because what else were you getting at the time? Not the best racer in the world, but a pretty good one. An already established franchise, but one appearing on new formats this month, Contra Hardcore, marking a debut for Contra on the Mega Drive, or on the Genesis actually, as this came out in America first in August '94, with European versions and Japanese versions following in September and October. This kind of was more straight up. Well, apart from the weird morphing stuff here and the fact that you could play was Alf, apparently. As the name suggested, a kind of a more hardcore version of, I think he's saying lock and load there, I'm not exactly sure, a hardcore version of Contra, like gone, even though from the beginning you had these third person behind the character view sections and top-down sections. This focused entirely on side-scrolling stages, and was, as you can see with the ridiculous explosions and the car crashing in the beginning here, I think kind of just a bit more of a humorous take on Contra. That said, it was very definitely hardcore in the sense that it is bloody hard, incredibly difficult, and I think that's one thing that marks it, is not just its pureness, I suppose, but also just its ludicrous level of difficulty. I'm already down to my last life here, and I did not use the typical Contra code. I guess it really helped to. I just wasted that. Oh no, and I'm dead. It helped to have another player in things, but not an easy game at all, but one that got a lot of fans. It's fondly regarded as a really good sort of installment of the series, and this of course also spawns Arc System Works redo on 360 and PS3 called Hardcore Uprising, which was a game I really loved. You'd have thought you could take cover behind that car. I suppose I could shoot through it, so... that took the extremely difficult nature of Contra Hardcore and added a sort of anime style art to everything, and also gave it a sort of RPG influence, and had you grind levels for upgrades and things like that. I really thoroughly enjoyed Contra Hardcore. Hardcore Uprising. This I think I would enjoy a lot more if I had better reflexes and if I was just better at games, but you know, such is life. So Contra Hardcore certainly, to Contra fans that were kind of left out by every other sort of Contra installment appearing on Nintendo consoles. This was a fine debut, although a little bit of a departure, as I said, by staying entirely true to side-scrolling platform routes and ditching all the periphery stuff. I just want to drive that car. Stay in that car, mate. Stay in that car, because you're just going to be, I don't know, you're going to be dog food in seconds otherwise. Contra, of course, by this point, still being known as Probotector in Europe. This is because everybody was still incredibly sensitive. I think it was a German thing, really, for selling, to get the game on sale in the German markets. Of course, the German market still, to this day, very sensitive about human violence. So they made everything robots in the West and called it Probotector. So I think this was Probotector Hardcore, I guess. Ah, you bastard. Have that. What? Oh no. Just as I was probably at a checkpoint too, but hey, you know, dug that little set piece there. Yeah, so that's Contra Hardcore, something that really needs more time to get good at and memorize than what I'm giving it here. But you know, a decent pick for August '94 if you were staying with your Genesis as opposed to spending all that money on a new 3DO. Next. Another familiar franchise making its debut on a new system, as we had Bomberman GB appear on Japanese Game Boys in August of 1994. His Bomberman has been assaulted on his motorbike by evil black Bombermen. I don't think that's a racial thing. I think that's just a color palette issue. And the basic idea here is that, well, we're gonna have to help Bomberman deal with his shit by taking out enemies along typical Bomberman maps. This kind of, you know, it takes the approach of typical Bomberman matches by having different enemies and Bomberman on the screen at once, as opposed to the other Bomberman GB games, which took more of a sort of story-based quest approach, which really didn't suit the game well. This was more sort of traditional Bomberman. This came out in the West a little bit later on under the different name of Wario Blast, featuring Bomberman. So this Japanese version did not feature Wario at all, but in the Western version you could play as either Bomberman Crab. Yay, he died first. You could either play as Bomberman or Wario, and if you played as Wario, it would just transform the black Bomberman into dark Wario clones. Basically, it was kind of a meaningless thing, but it was a means to tack Wario's face onto something. I don't really know why. I guess it was Nintendo's publishing arrangement with Hudson for that creeping through. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of lacking as a Bomberman game, largely because you don't have the tactical view that other Bomberman games have, so you can't see the whole map at once, which is kind of important. He just took care of himself there. Wow, I win. I'm gonna move on to the next one. Now there's two enemies here. So it's just situations like that where the other guy killed himself and I have no idea how I won. but I did win. So yeah, there's sort of that kind of thing that takes it out of proceedings, and there's also just the fact that Bomberman in single player is not fun. So you kind of needed link cables for this to be enjoyable at all. And this would actually go through, you know, this issue with trying to create single player Bomberman would influence and you know, affect Hudson for quite a while after this. There was Bomberman GB 2 and 3 where they tried to, as I said, create a kind of story and a purpose for Bomberman beyond, there's black Bombermen, they're not good, kill them. You know, he was venturing into caves, and it was, I guess, a little bit more of a puzzle game than a frantic, fun, arcadey affair. I think we can't really do anything, being assaulted in that regard. You know, and that kind of just didn't work. And I remember when Hudson would continue to work with Nintendo on Bomberman for the N64 just a few years later. There would be Bomberman 64 that had a terrible single player mode that was just, you know, really tacked on. And then there was Bomberman World, which was this dismal game that didn't have any multiplayer at all. It was just like, you have to play this god-awful single-player mode, or else. You know, that was really just super ridiculous. And this, I guess, was the beginning of that. And then in the meantime, you had Bomberman appearing, you know, in his more regular form on the Saturn and PlayStation in 2D, and being amazing still. So, yeah, it was always, despite Bomberman having good outings on the Super Nintendo, he did not fare well on Nintendo platforms through most of the 1990s. Crap. Dear. Never mind. But yeah, let's move on from well-established franchises to ones that were just you know, producing their first sequels this month. August 1994 is significant for 3 sequels as well, and not 3 particularly famous sequels, kind of obscure ones, or at least obscure for the time, the first of which being this, Mother 2. Well, actually this is the English version, so this is Earthbound that we're looking at, and its obscurity, certainly in the West, comes from the fact that, well, there wasn't a Mother 1 in, you know, in America and Europe. There wasn't even a Mother, there wasn't even an Earthbound in Europe, thanks to Nintendo of Europe basically barely existing at the time and having contempt for the continent. So nothing ever, you know, hardly anything ever made it across in that regard. But an English translation of the first Mother for the NES was completed, pretty much. It just never happened, it never came out. And so this was the first sort of taste that American gamers had of Shigesato Itoi's kind of unique sense of humor and fondness for American culture in the mid-20th century. So something has landed in the front yard outside, and we're going to check it out, but, you know, might as well get some money as well. Same point. Go, I'm going to crack that. There you go, I'm going to arm myself properly. Yeah, so Mother 2, like Mother before it, an RPG, so there's not much we're going to get through in this just opening little stretch of gameplay here. But, you know, really, I think the first Mother game wasn't particularly, you know, innovative or, you know, unique from a mechanical standpoint. And it was kind of a sort of reasonably soft RPG game. And, you know, so I think Mother 2 kind of followed in those footsteps. But where it won you know, its fans over was in this, you know, just immensely lovable nature and the kind of offbeat humor that existed within it. Earthbound came to the West in 1995, so it was Mother 2. Oh yeah. So it was Mother 2 that came out in August 1994. But it really, when it did hit in 95, and you know, as people were getting ensconced and falling in love with crudely rendered 3D polygons on newer systems, Earthbound didn't review well, and it was only the sort of, you know, the cult status that it attained in later years, and you know, that earned it fans. Yeah, it really didn't review that well. It received sort of middling write-ups everywhere, and didn't sell particularly well, which led it to being fairly rare. And then there was this overwhelming call, you know, at Nintendo for year upon year to re-release it and get it back out there. And of course, it eventually landed on the Wii U Virtual Console last year. I think there's a meteorite going on. But yeah, I mean, that kind of sort of sums up Mother. I mean, Mother, as I said, never made it across the West. You know, Nintendo kind of felt that, oh, you know, this was in their Westerners don't enjoy RPGs phase. And then Mother 2 kind of bore that out, you know. It really didn't perform well. So, you know, I think Nintendo kind of felt at that point they were proved right. And then Mother 3 was a whole different story. Mother 3 was originally called Mother 64, and it was going to be, you know, an N64 cartridge game, and then it was going to be let's put the officer somewhere. And then it was going to be a 64DD game. And then that, you know, that didn't happen, and then eventually, you know, this 3D epic RPG game was eventually sort of ported down, almost demade onto the Game Boy Advance. So Mother 3 came out on the GBA, and once again never made it to the West. And once again there is this call for, you know, that's still ongoing. For Western gamers to get their hands on Mother 3, but yeah, there's not much, you know, we don't have time to go into too much detail on the game itself, but yeah, the first of 3 kind of obscure sequels in August 1994. Well, staying in the weird sequel file, here we have Pac Man 2, The New Adventures on Mega Drive / Genesis in August 1994, and yeah, it's hard to believe that Pac Man was about, 12 years old at this point, and here, and only here, was Pac Man 2, especially considering there had been about, 15 Pac Man games in between, from Pac-Land to Miss Pac-Man, obviously, and through Pac and Pal and everything else. But this was the canonical Pac Man 2 from Namco, and much like Pac-Land, kind of derived more inspiration from the Pac Man cartoon rather than Pac Man itself. So rather than Pac Man being the sort of slice of pizza with, you know, or the pizza with one slice cut out, here's this horrible anthropomorphized ball thing that's talking all the time. And yeah, a very big departure from Pac Man, and just a weird game. Rather than having direct control of Pac Man, what you're doing is you're helping him along by firing a catapult at stuff. So it's a bit like a point and click adventure game, except you don't have direct control of Pac. Instead, like, he's this idiot that needs to be told absolutely everything. So you kind of have to shoot at stuff to you know, I had to shoot at the letterbox to open it, and then I have to tell him to look in the right direction so he gets his letter, and now I don't know what he wants. Let's wake up this dog over here. Like that. Wait, look this way. Aim the slingshot with the crosspad. I know that. Oh. But it's kind of like, well, hit everything. Try shooting at everything. And then Pac Man might find something. So this is, yeah, the standard kind of... Oh, right, there you go. Kind of point and click adventure stuff. Pixel hunt, click on absolutely everything. You might trigger something, or Pac Man might just get really angry at you for no real reason because you wrecked his house. I suppose because you wrecked his house, but he's just... I don't know why he's upset at me. What did I do wrong? You're telling me to hit everything. Oh, now he wants his paper plane. Now you want your paper plane. Go this way. Look up there. Alright, let's get that. Let's knock that tree. That plane out the tree. There you go. Yay, now he's briefly happy. There's a sort of weird virtual pet element to this of trying to keep Pac happy rather than actually just playing the game. He just gets really angry because, you know, get the plane down. Honestly, my 10-month-old son he's less temperamental than Pac Man is at this point. And now get this, now get that. Jeez, I mean, it's kind of I don't know, a little bit of a kid's game in a way. It's hey, get the kids to sort of interact with absolutely everything on the screen, in a bid to make and he's locked himself out, in a bid to advance the story. So that's kind of, you know, if you view it in that respect, then it's not bad. I think, you know, Pac Man 2 gets a lot of bad press. But I think mainly because it's this weird kids point and click adventure with Pac Man talking stuff, talking at you the whole time. Rather than a Pac Man game. I think if it was called something else, if they got a different character to do stuff, but then maybe it would have been sort of more well received. Oh no, get rid of these guys. Oh, what? Let's help Pac Man by using the power pellet. Yeah, and use the A button to shoot the power pellet. So yeah, full of very sort of loose allusions to proper Pac Man, but yeah, and this is just creepy. This is just weird. So yeah, definitely one deserving of being in the bizarre sequel pile, bizarre as opposed to obscure sequel pile, for August 1994. And his Pac Man is just funny looking. I think everything's just funny looking. Everything's strange. Yeah, Pac Man 2 New Adventures, not a terrible game, just kind of a terrible Pac Man game, and really, really bizarre. But let's move on and take a look at one more obscure sequel from the summer of '94. Our last game for this month then, and our last obscure sequel for this month, and it's Putty Squad on the Amiga. This was the sequel to Putty, which also came out on the Amiga a couple of years prior. Putty was originally going to be called Silly Putty and was going to be licensed on the, I guess, popular at the time, Play Gunk. I never had any. And the idea behind that game was, you know, you were Putty, you could, as you're seeing here, sort of morph in different shapes, form a fist to punch things, and sort of slide through enemies, extend and twist and do all that sort of stuff. And, you know, Putty was this platform game where you sort of roamed around these labyrinthine levels, picking up your friend putties and punching bad dudes, and there's a cat that's bad, and it was an alright platformer. It was kind of inventive, the the different abilities that Putty had, the fact that you could inflate to get to high places, all this kind of thing. It was, you know, it seemed to fit. It had a decent amount of character to it. And Putty Squad was the expansion of that. It was sort of, as you're seeing here, it was similar gameplay, prettied up, made good looking on newer hardware. This was an Amiga 1200 game predominantly. And it was also being developed on consoles. The problem was that System 3 that were making it decided right before the game was set to come out on the Amiga that the Amiga market was failing and that Putty Squad just wasn't worth the cash to put out, even though it was completely finished. Magazines had reviewed it and everything. So a version for the European Super Nintendo came out, but the Amiga version never did, and it just sort of lingered as one of the examples of, a famous example of European vaporware forever and ever. Until just this past winter, when Putty Squad, for whatever reason, System 3, who are still incredibly still around, put out a remastered version of Putty Squad for new consoles. And also they managed to track down the original Amiga disk files that were kicking about. That apparently there were original Amiga discs that had rotted and corroded, and somehow they'd managed to restore all of this stuff from near nothing, and they released the Amiga disk files onto the System 3 website for legitimate, absolutely free. So you can check this out if you have WinUAE to play. It's okay, the Redux that came out on newer consoles that I haven't played kind of got slammed, mainly because it was very expensive for what it was. But this game here is alright. Putty handles quite fine, except for the fact that you have to use up to jump, as what plagued Amiga game controls. And it's got this typical obsession with Python-esque humor that many European platformers had at the time. Of course, you eat the green cheese to warp to a secret area. Of course, there are frogs running around. None of it makes much sense, which is why I think a lot of the American game press really didn't like it. But, a perfectly adequate platformer, if nothing special, just, got this sense of weirdness attached to it.